Welcome everyone, welcome to my channel, The Inked Reader. Today we are wrapping up all the books I've read in the month of April. I am filming this a couple of days before the end of the month, but I actually started 11 books. There is no way in hell that I'm gonna finish any of those in the last couple of days of the month. I am also not gonna include comics in these because I am focusing on finishing one series in particular and kind of reading a chunk of another series. So either I do a one-off wrap-up, comics wrap up actually at some point, maybe at the end of it next month. We will see. I need to figure out my comics game. I am still reading them, but I am now kind of focusing more on single series and reading more volumes than one series rather than reading 10 different types of comics a month. And at the moment, because of the time I've got in my hands, which is little, that's how it's been working. So I will continue wrapping up comics, but I need to figure out the best way to do so. And also I think these videos are yet a bit too long when I include the comics as well, and so I don't know what I'm gonna do at the moment. For this month, only in April, I'm just gonna wrap up books and we will figure out for the comics. Maybe I'll go back to the normal both in the same video at the end of the next month or not. I'll have to think about that. So without further ado, let's discuss the 9 things I read in the month of April. And let's start at number 9 with Kingdom of the Feared, the final book in a trilogy by Maniscalco, and this is about Emilia. Emilia, she comes from a family of witches. She is herself a witch, and her sibling, her actual twin sister, is murdered by a demon, and so she has to team up with another demon in order to solve her twin murder. And this is the premise of the first book. Now, this could also be entitled How to Ruin a Series for Dummies. I hated how she wrapped up the series, and to be fair, apart from book number 1, I kind of disliked book number 2, and this was kind of like the cherry on the cake. If a cake gave you diarrhea and food poisoning. It was bad. I think it was objectively bad, and I am gonna probably say now that although I've heard great things about the spin-offs, I am really put off them. I don't think this author is for me. I have enjoyed only the first book in this series, and I hated their Jack the Ripper retelling, and the writing is just not my style. I don't think the character depths are done well. I don't like her characters, and I'm particularly put off by the idea of reading another book thinking that at one point one character that's very present in these, and she changes a lot through the book, and the idea of having to stomach a whole book about her, I can't. I know that not all books are going to be about that. I think the spin-off are going to be like one book for each, like a different character. But I'm just so disappointed overall, and I kind of really understood that her writing is not my style. I think in the first book, the story, because it was a kind of a murder mystery, in a sense, with a fantasy background and demons in it, the scope was a bit less and the scope was more contained, and I think that worked quite well. But now in book number 2 and 3, that the scope of the story becomes so much bigger, and we go to hell basically, it just really loses its plot and its threads, and it's absurd because thinking about reading a book that takes place in hell, it just sounds so exciting, even the idea of it, and unfortunately it was so lackluster. The characters were boring. Emilia was particularly boring, and her inner dialogue, I think we read from her point of view, was so dreadfully draining to just read through her. Bored by Emilia to the point that despite me loving Wrath in the first book, I kind of lost interest in him too, because I couldn't understand what these men sort of saw in her. I was just so bored out of my mind. It also reads very much like a YA, but with weird, not good sex scenes in it. I'm sorry, it was bad with sexy times, in my opinion. And also, on top of everything else, what kind of hell is this? I mean, sign me up for it, but what kind of hell is this? Like, I don't know, I've got this notion of hell being full of suffering and pain and terrifying things, and this hell was just, gorgeous looking demons, parties, and just being bad, but being bad in a fancy, like almost like, I don't know, influencer way. I hated hell. I hated the setting, hated the writing, hated the characters choices. I think I'm dropping the series. Yeah, yeah, it just doesn't feel right for me anymore. Then let's continue on with the disappointments, shall we? A Fate Inked in Blood. This is the stunning fairly limited edition, done an unboxing of these, and this is the first book in a duology. So I'll try to explain the plot without giving any spoilers and without being here too long, but because it's quite complicated. So in this book, which is inspired by Norse mythology, you have children of the gods. So basically the way it works is that certain humans are born actually from a human mother, but the human mother has been impregnated by a god, and this god can be a female or male god, I believe. So you basically have these babies born with powers, and these babies are not that common, and therefore they're very cherished by, you know, the people, because they can use their power to help. And at the beginning of this book you follow Freya. Freya, she is one of these children of a god, so she has powers, but she has kept them hidden, and she's in an unfortunate marriage with a man that she loves, until one day they get into a fight and she has to reveal her powers, and this revelation is witnessed by the local Jarl, chief, I don't know how you say, but it's the guy that commands, you know, he holds power over their land, and his son. And there's this prophecy saying that whoever has the same powers that Freya is displaying will help whoever controls her to conquer land and become the king of all the land. So of course he takes her away with him in order to use her powers, and she has to work with his son Bjorn in order to kind of train to become a warrior and so on. Now this is a very vague premise for a premise that's quite kind of complex, but that's the best I can do. It's a slow burn romance, and you've got prophecies and gods and myths and all of that, and based on Norse mythology. Now this started very strong, very strong, and I did enjoy a lot of small parts in these. I did like the character of Bjorn. I did like, at the beginning it was very compelling and entertaining. I did like the mythology side of it, and I did like certain kinds of, you know, bits here and there. But this unfortunately goes against the saying of, you know, the sum was better than its parts. I think this was exactly the opposite, where the parts were better than its sum. I didn't particularly like Freya as a character, and I've noticed that so many books are written in first point of view, and if you don't like the point of view, and more than liking is also like finding it interesting. I kind of lost interest in Freya, and because of the time, you know, by the time you get to halfway through, which things really slow down, at the point I could understand how she worked, her inner working, and so I knew where she was going all the time. I found it quite boring at time because I wasn't particularly fond of her, and so overall this felt a bit flat. I also find the writing quite disappointing overall. Unfortunately, it does read like a YA, but not a good one, with boring sentences. The structure of a sentence is just, I don't like it. It becomes, because it's quite chunky of a book, it becomes repetitive. It just doesn't flow nicely, and again probably it's a combination of me also not liking the point of view of her. The ending kind of, I could see it coming, so again there were a lot of twists that I did call, but very true pity, because at the beginning there's a lot of action at the beginning where Freya does do things unexpectedly, and that was exciting to witness. So it kind of like went up, and then it went just steadily downhill to a point that it wasn't like an abrupt descent, if you want, but I don't know, will I pick up the sequel? I have no idea. I will probably wait and see what people say about it, and then see what I want to do. But yeah, moving on. Then I will have to put Shackled Fates. This is the second book in the Hanged God trilogy. I sang the praises of the first book last month, in the last month wrap up, and I kind of stand by it. Overall I think I really like the story. The premise of this is that you follow different point of views of these characters, mainly focusing on this small village called Ash Hill, and at the beginning of the first book, this is a Viking village. They are being kind of invaded by Christians, and so you follow different point of view of these characters having to try to defend their fate in the gods. And all the characters in the first book embark on a journey, personal journey, to find and reach out to the gods for different reasons, or try to make something of themselves in the kind of troubled times around their village and, you know, what's happening now. This does take inspiration, I believe, from historical facts when the Vikings, so started to become kind of converted to Christianity, and you basically follow a bunch of characters trying to resist that. What I particularly loved about this series, and especially in the first book, is that the myths, the gods, and the mythology, Norse mythology, is all intertwined in the story. Gods are real, giants are real, you see them, you read about them. Some of the point of view you follow are from, you know, non-humans, and it's very, very interesting. And those things are still true about these. I really enjoyed all the point of views still. I just found these a bit more slow, and it's absurd, of the first book, because technically it's not more slow. So I don't know if because I'm reading this back to back I was a bit fatigued by having, you know, read the first tome, because it's more than 500 pages back to back. That could be the case, but it could be a bit of my fault as well. But I also kind of noticed that because this is mostly a fantasy where your characters travel around all the time, and I don't particularly love the traveling bits of fantasy. I've said this a couple of times on my channel before, where if there is a lot of traveling in the fantasy books I read, or if a book is mainly about the traveling, on average I am bored. And while in the first book that was true for it, there was a lot of traveling, I was so enthralled by everything else that was going on, everything was so new to me. In this book the traveling part started to get to me, although while they travel a million events happen, and I was actually very interested in any of those events. The plot really picks up, it was full of twists and things coming, so I don't know what it was just a vibe that wasn't there as much as in the first book. I also have to say that probably her writing is starting to rub me the wrong way in a sense. She has a very particular style of writing where it's very abrupt, and it's well done, but it's very abrupt. She doesn't use certain kind of adjectives, she goes straight to the point, she jumps from part to part, so part of it must be said that it's told to you rather than shown to you, so you might jump in time. And she might kind of, the way she tells this story at times, it feels very much she's telling you. And there's a gap of years, for example, toward the end, where maybe 10 years have passed, and it was just like adjusting to that was a bit difficult at times. So her writing is not necessarily my cup of tea. However, it could be very refreshing for so many people, because it's a different kind of writing, especially for a fantasy, with very little embellishment to it, straight to the point. So some people might love it. I'm looking forward though to finish this trilogy. Overall, it's still something that I am liking. I'm still something that I am and I don't know what to expect from this. Yeah, let's say that I have no idea what to expect. Now that we're reaching the end, what's gonna happen, no idea. Then I will have to put these, which I have to say that technically speaking, I probably enjoyed Shackled Fates tiny bit more than these. However, these taught me a lot of things I didn't know before, and so in my mind I love when a book teaches me something, and so that's why I bumped it up one place, but they could kind of go hand in hand. This is a non-fiction, it's called The Wager, and it's the story of this British vessel that gets separated from other two vessels where they were on a mission to chase the Spanish and ambush the Spanish fleet. The Wager is an English fleet, and they become stranded. The crew that survives a horrible storm then becomes stranded on this island because the vessel breaks on the rocks, and so the survivors have to survive on this island in Brazil, I believe, for weeks, if not months actually. And then what happens, you know, at the beginning is that they manage, some of them, the one that survived, to go back to England, but at different times and with very different stories. And these people that come back in different chunks, some of these people say that actually part of the crew committed mutiny, and so they should be tried and hanged because of it. And the first part I really enjoyed, because it was a lot about, you know, how life at sea was, about scurvy, which I did know very little of, about how it just worked and all the mechanisms behind it. When we get to the latter part of the book about the island and so on, it was still very fascinating. However, I do have a thing. So this is the same author that wrote Killers of the Flower Moon, which is such a compelling story, but I found his writing a bit boring. And I think it's just me and him not clicking perfectly, because I love the stories, I learn so much, and I'm truly fascinated by the plot, what he's telling us about, what is, you know, the historical part of the things that he's telling us. But I do get bored while reading his books. And I know it's not the content, so it must be the writing, right? I also found the end part where you finally get to this bloody trial very anticlimactic, is wrapped up very quickly, and you just go, oh, that's it, because I think the way he builds this book, right? So he starts the book saying there is this trial and this is why there is the trial. So you kind of start at the focus point and then you go back and you read all the stories that led to the trial, but when the actual trial comes around, it's very short, uneventful, and ultimately very like, oh, that's it. So I was a bit disappointed, to be fair, but I believe that the trial that went that way. So I was disappointed in actual history, not necessarily in, you know, what he puts in, because that's how he went. That's how anticlimactic the whole thing was. In short, but yeah, I've learned a lot about some of the English words that they use, where they come from, the origin of certain kind of way of saying. So that was very fascinating. I will still pick up his books, provided that I know now that I just will find some passages or the way maybe structures it a bit boring at times, and still okay with that because I'm still learning a lot from them. Then I was lucky enough to have Arcanum Unbounded by Brandon Sanderson. So I was about to start book number 3 in Oathbringer. So I was about to start Oathbringer by by Brandon Sanderson, and then at the beginning it says you should have read the novella Edge Dancer, and you could find this in Arcanum Unbound, and that is the only one of the few books I ever won on Goodreads at the time when in UK they were still doing kind of giveaways. So I managed to go back to Arcanum Unbound and read just that. So I didn't read the whole collection of short stories on the Cosmere Award. I just read Edge Dancer, and I really enjoyed it. I really liked it. Initially I was a bit put off by the fact that we follow a young character, has kind of a bit more childish dialogue, but in the end it was very funny, and I found quite curious with events that happen, what we find out. Because I'm not reading those books back to back, a lot of the history, because it's complex, it's a high fantasy, epic fantasy, a lot of, you know, who are the Radiants, who are these, I get a bit confused, so I need to refresh my mind at times before I go on. But I really enjoyed these 100 pages long novella. It's quite of a chunky one, and yeah, I want to know now, reading Oathbringer, how necessary it was. I can't tell you at the moment because I've not read the third book. I can't tell you if it was like essential to the reading experience of what is it called, the Stormlight Archive stories, but the author says so, and I kind of trust that. So yeah, it was a fun time. Really like the humor in these, and I even got used to reading from a child point of view, which for me is not that easy. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to see how these characters are gonna appear again from now on in the rest of the series. Next we have a book that received all the buzz and I couldn't skip it, me being such a true lover of true crime. Now this is a fictionalized story based on a true crime, and I'm talking about Bright Young Women. It's difficult to say what this is about because there is a part of me that says don't say who this is about, continue on with the author did. So okay, let's say that this is a fictionalized version of events that happened in the 70s, and it's based on a true crime, based on a very popular serial killer, maybe one of the most famous serial killers ever. So you follow two women, two perspectives with two women, and one of them is she's a survivor in the sense that she saw the guy, and the other one, she is a would-be victim. And so there is, from the beginning, you know, this is not a spoiler, so there's the kind of dread that comes with reading the point of view of a woman you know will end up brutally murdered, and at the same time you follow instead this woman in the 70s, and then in recent times having to deal with the consequences of the actions of this person in the sorority house. She was the kind of, you know, the girl in charge of the sorority house when this killer struck, and she lost people she loved during the attack, and she witnessed him, she saw him, so she had to then go on trial to, you know, to testify and all of that comes with it. And also you kind of follow her for a few chapters in current times, 2000 something, and what happened after, and how this has been hunting her. So it's a bit of a complex structure, but it becomes very clear when you start. There's no confusion whatsoever. I must say that I found, first of all, the title of this book so bloody clever. I was like, this book got a 5 stars from me from the title, because during the trial of this serial killer, he was called by the judge like a bright young man who went and did all of these things. And she's literally saying, fuck you, justice system, fuck you, you know, media and everybody who has created this myth around this man that actually was pretty basic and just a psychopath, sociopath, serial killer. So she's just really saying, F you, you know, this is about the bright young women that came before him and survived him, some of them. So I love the title. I really liked her writing, although at times it was a bit difficult for me to follow some sentences. I would have to read a couple of times just because of the way, you know, she structures them, which is not her fault, it's my fault. Just found some of her writing complex at times to go through, and I was hunted by this while reading these. It really stuck with me, it really scared me at night, because I'm very, 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 very familiar with the serial killer. And I really loved how she's kind of, you know, saying and looking at how people are so obsessed by true crime, and how all of the spotlight is put on the killer, not on the victims, which is something that I've been saying before a few years back when I read another true crime that really focused on the victims. So I really loved following the victims. Now, these are fictionalized events, so not everything that's in here actually happened. I guess, though, that a lot of the things probably came pretty close. She probably had good guesses in what happened, and I really loved how she created these characters and all the intricacies and their stories before they ever met this guy. So love the writing, love what she's done with it. Although I have to say that I did find that although she really tried not to make this about him, he was mentioned so many times, at all times, in all pages, that this book, for me, it was more about him than I believe the author intended it to be. There is a massive bumblebee trying to get in, but I closed the window, bitch. You're not getting in today. Anyway, so I was hunted by him, despite these. The scope of this was just to be on the victims, and I believe that somehow the way she structures it, it's still about him, and him is what stuck with me the most. And this is a personal experience, though I'm not saying that it's the experience probably that everybody has. I still respect the hell out of this, because, you know, and that's why it got 5 stars. But I don't know, there was so much hype about these, and I have very conflict feelings about this overall. It was chilling. It was a chilling read, brilliant read at the same time, and I can speak about this for literally probably 2 hours, so I won't do it. This is a book I would say I would suggest reading, especially if you're into true crime. I think it still holds a lot of food for thoughts for anybody to read, to be read. You might not enjoy it as much as other people did. I particularly enjoyed it, although I didn't love it as much as I was expecting it to, again, because he hunted the pages, and the way he was so present, for me, was, you know, not what she wanted to be, and then it turned out to be anyway. Although my experience might be informed for how much I know about this case, but it's something that I believe everybody could get something out of by reading. Okay, then, though bright young women will have to be, in terms of how much I respect their book, will have to probably be first or second place, depends, probably second place, because I loved the first place so much. So I would probably, if it was just about the quality of the book and the scope of the book and the importance that the book had for me, probably, yeah, Bright Young Women would have come at number 2. And for certain reasons, if I was looking at non-fiction, I would definitely put it at number 1. However, in terms of enjoyment, that was the right place for it, because I had a tough time while reading it, and I wouldn't describe enjoyment as... enjoyment wouldn't be a word that would come up when describing how I've experienced that book. So at number 3, I will actually have to put, for enjoyment, Leviathan Wakes. This is book number 1 in the Expanse series, a massive space opera, and at the beginning of this, you basically have, so now humans have expanded outside Earth, and they are inhabiting all the solar system. And now I think new species have kind of emerged because of the gravity, and how, you know, some people on the belt, this area of the solar system, for example, they do look a bit different, and they definitely have their own dialect and culture and all of that. So you follow two point of views. One is a human that works on the spaceship that brings glaciers from one area to the other, probably, if I remember correctly, to provide water. And then you follow on the belt, this area of the solar system, you follow this detective that is tasked to find out what happened to the daughter of this rich family that disappeared. And this was a lot of fun. And I am very new to the sci-fi genre, and for many years I wouldn't reach out for it because all the scientific and tech terms would get over my head. I don't find it particularly interesting. Space is not something that I am personally in awe of. Like, it terrifies me, would never go to space. And although I love learning that stuff, so we'll always, you know, if someone speaks about space, I will listen and be curious, but it's not something I gravitate toward. Nice words there, Eva. Anyway, so space is something that, because it doesn't appeal to me that much overall in the grand scheme of things, of everything that interests me, sci-fi is a genre that I didn't reach out much for. But people keep talking about these very, you know, epic series, and as someone who loves books, I couldn't skip out. And I've been loving the Red Rising saga, past book number 1. And because I've cherished and loved that so much, I was like, I really need to give a try to other very famous series. So I started with these, and overall I'm so glad I did, because despite the fact that the thing that I loved about these is the mysteries, finding out what happened to the girl that, you know, Miles, the detective, is looking for, and what happened to, you know, Holden, what's going on there. So the mysteries and what's happening was the most fascinating part. And yes, the scientific terms went way above my head, and at one point in the first 200 pages I was like, can I do this? Is this for me? Is it too much for me? But I'm so glad I sticked around, because the payoff was amazing. The action at the end, I couldn't put down the book for the last 200 pages. I wanted to know what happened, and I will definitely continue on with the series. So overall, I would describe it as a big success. It made me want to go on, and I just need to get used to the science. And for example, in my ignorance, it took me probably 30 pages to understand what G was, and it's gravity, right? And I was like, what the hell is this? And then I was like, oh, okay, it's gravity, Eva. And so yeah, I am, because I'm so unused to all the terms, it's a bit clunky at times, the process of reading these things, because I have to stop and think what it is, what part is that. And to be fair, reading sci-fi in your second language, I think is particularly hard. I would probably find it easier and to a certain degree more appealing reading it is in Italian, but I don't want to read a translated work when I can just adapt. So I will adapt, but give me some time. And a couple of things. Holden love story. That was bullshit. Like, I would have done it without. Like, I really didn't like how at the beginning of the story he is so enamored with this person. This person doesn't, you know, this person dies, and it's not a major spoiler, to be fair. She dies, and he was as sad as I could be when I think that I don't know, I bought some crisps and lost them along the way before getting home. It's a bit annoying, but then, you know, by the end of the hour, I will have forgotten it. That's how it felt, like, so, you know, it was so enamored, and then all of a sudden, you know, yeah, she's dead. And then it goes straight after someone else. Yeah, I just wish that had not happened the way it did happen. I liked how she gave him a lifetime there at the beginning, but what happened in the end, I was like, no, that was not necessarily, I found the love story a bit off, like it put me a bit off him. Didn't love that. I did love Miles, and I did love how they play out on each other. I loved how when these two characters interact, eventually they know the author was so skilled in basically predicting from one point of view to the other what the other person would do. So basically they meet, they kind of get to know each other, and at the time toward the end of the book, you got a character, Holden, might say, oh, I know what Miller would do in this case. He would say these and these. And Miller would do the same with Holden. And it does kind of to me, it said, oh, this is very good character development, because you're not only building each other apart, but you're building their relationship, and them making inferences about the other person's reaction and train of thoughts. That's elevated character development for me. And I don't know why I caught this. I don't know if it's particularly new, but it's the first book I can think of that really made me think, he's making inferences from one character to the other about how they operate, and I've not noticed these in other books. So I don't know why, maybe I didn't pay attention myself, and it happens all the time, but I found it particularly skillful in terms of characterization. But yeah, moving on, really love this. I will continue on with the series. Now, number 2 is gonna be a surprise for many, because this is a YA romance that worked wonders. And I'm talking about the Crimson Moth. First of all, I'm obsessed with this color of hair. Obsessed. And this is the guy, which, I mean, look at these two gorgeous people. It did help having a visual of, visualizing these characters while reading this. But this is the story of, you follow both point of views. So you follow the point of view of a witch that's hidden because society has outcasted them. If witches are caught, they are hanged, so executed. And then you follow a witch hunter. And now at the beginning of the book, the witch hunter is chasing after this Crimson Moth, this witch that it's liberating other witches, or kind of warning them before they can be caught so they can flee. And then at the same time you follow Rune, and she's this heiress, and her grandmother who adopted her. I believe she was adopted or biological, I don't remember. Anyway, the grandmother was a witch, so she had to actually out her. So Rune had to tell, the local authority, my grandmother is a witch, so she was then executed, and she has to live with that guilt. And there they can't stand each other, but they need information from each other. So they kind of start playing this game. Both of them are pretending to be interested in a potential marriage with the other, in order though to get information from the other. And the dynamics between two characters was so well done. Now let me say this: the world building, the plot in itself, not the first time I hear such a premise. I remember Blood and Honey. What was the other? There was another popular book about a witch and a witch hunter, and I really enjoyed that series. Book to aside. So it's not the first time I hear this premise. It's not the world building, it was nothing special. It does read mostly like a YA. However, it's a pity. I hoped she had written an adult book. There are some scenes in here that are bordering new adult, like adult books, so just be aware. There are some sexual content, to be fair, and I don't remember the last time I gave up on sleep in order to finish a book, but I needed to know what Rune and Gideon would do. They're setting aside the word, which to me, like, it wasn't, I liked her writing a lot. So the word, because of the way she describes it kept me entertained enough. But I was obsessed by these two characters, by this kind of playing each other, and at the same time trying not to fall for each other while playing for each other. It was so entertaining. And the idea that now I have to wait another year to see what happens to these characters that I became obsessed with. Their tension, the romantic tension between these two people, it's absolutely crazy. And to be fair, although there is a lot of frustrating part because of their character, because of the way they're doing, it makes sense. All the things happening here makes a lot of sense for the majority of the time. And also I must say that she does the point of view enough differently that I never felt like his point of view is just her point of view just with, a male protagonist. They really felt distinct enough. I had a blast with this, and if you like romantic fantasy, you need to give this a try. A couple I'm the most invested in at the moment, and that says something, considering how many, currently romances, like fantasy romances, I am following. These ones, they are my top couple. They're not really a couple, to be fair, but they're my top ship at the moment. And that's, again, I think it's a praise for the book. and number one, and these could only be number one. And I am potentially, I'm saying this in April, let's see if someone can dethrone these, because I think I found my favorite book of the year. Let's see, it's still early in the year, but as of now, there are no contestants to these. So a number one book of the year for now has to be Empire of the Damned. Now, this is an epic, grimdark vampire fantasy by Mr. Christoph, and the first book, Empire of the Vampire, was one of my best books, I think of 2022, I think it came out. Obsessed with that book. I said in my Goodreads review for Empire of the Vampire that, you know, it's like Mr. Christoph sat down with me at the cafe and asked me, Eva, what is your perfect book? What do you want to read about? And he went home and wrote it, and wrote Empire of the Vampire. It's just perfection for me. Like, that's exactly my kind of story. And I would not change one bloody sentence of that book. And to be fair, although I would change a couple of sentences of these, the plot in itself, the characters, I wouldn't again change a thing. This is the story of, it's a very complex synopsis to give, but basically you follow this world where vampires are now ruling. Vampires have won and humans are cattle. And you follow this vampire hunter that used to belong to this order that, as you know, they trained and then execute the vampire as their job, as their mission in life. But now they're kind of dismantled. He is the only one left, and so he has been imprisoned by vampires who requested him to tell them his history, his story. And so that's what he does. He sits down with a vampire scribe, sort of historian, and he recounts how he became a vampire hunter and what happened and why the order became, you know, went south and what happened there and so on. I don't want to spoil anything. If you have read Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire, I think he does. I've read a couple of interviews by him, and he just says that, you know, some of the inspirations are also Empire of the Vampire, Anne Rice, the Vampire Chronicle series. It definitely feels like Interview with a Vampire, the style where, you know, you got a vampire telling someone their story. Now this is a vampire hunter, not a vampire, but, you know, the sense of going back in time and telling like the kind of biography, if you want, to someone else, and you go back and forth in time. And in this one, you kind of continue on where we left off in the book number one. Before I gush on these, a couple of things. His writing, I get, is not for everyone. I think his writing is a bit pretentious at times. I love it. Like, I love it. For me, it's perfection. I wouldn't change his writing in a million years, but I do get why some people don't like it. I also think that he puts a lot of physical description of certain characters, and it can be a bit too much. Like, there's a character with mismatched eyes, and we are told constantly in every page that she has mismatched eyes. And that rubbed me more than I ever remember being rubbed by anything wrong in the first book. So I don't know if that's something that I actually didn't notice in the first book and it was still there, or if something that in here kind of have a bit of a heavy hand with that. Couple of twists are also kind of, you see that coming quite easily. So a lot of twists I did call, but some others I didn't. Yet this is my kind of story. This is a kind of brutal, violent, tormented vampires that I grew up with. I grew up with Dracula. I read the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice when I was very young, and that's the kind of vampire that kind of stuck in my mind. The kind of, you know, the vampires are my favorite creatures when it comes down to fantasy, and so I was obsessed with vampires, and I've consumed so much literature about them. And although I did love Twilight for what it was, Twilight came after all of my other readings on classical vampire stories. So here we go back to those vampires that live eternally. They see humans as cattle, and there is a good reason for that. Can you say good reasons? Whether it's just as humans see animals as cattle, then why wouldn't vampires see humans as cattle? And also, you know, there is a lot of discussion about humanity in general, and using vampires as a metaphor at times for life and death, and all in between, and all the emotions. I found it particularly clever. I found it particularly interesting. It's a book that every scene, I could really picture every scene in my mind because of the way he described things. Descriptions takes pages at times. For me, it works very well. And I must say also that Dior, one of the characters in these, There is a romance that she gets into at one point, which I think it was too rushed and he could have done without. But apart from that, I could read his writing, especially for this book, because I did like his Evernight or Weather, but I wasn't obsessed with it. But this series I'm obsessed. So I would read about these characters with this writing style forever. I could read this series if it was like a series of 1,000,000 books for a whole year and probably wouldn't complain. That's how much I'm obsessed with this. There is something, there are all of these kind of small things like, oh, that was Interview with a Vampire, or that was by that, or that's, you know, a Stalker, or whether it is, I see his inspirations and then yet he does something completely new with them. So, you know, it's not a ripoff by any means, but I really liked where he gets inspiration, because these vampires called to me in a way that only those classical vampire stories called to me back in the days when I started becoming obsessed with vampires and reading. Books like these remind me why I love fantasy so much, and the amount of action, the amount of absolutely brutal mayhem and fighting scenes, and the way also he does is very clever. It almost is like watching a movie, because you get different can you say point of view? It's not correct because it's told in, yeah, it's a bit difficult. I don't know how to explain it, but basically, you know, you might follow certain characters and you get to a point and then you see the things from the other perspective, and then you see from that, and then you go back on what happened there. So it really keeps you on the edge of your seat. So yeah, I'm obsessed with this. I'm obsessed with this series, with these characters. And I have tabbed the shit out of this just because his writing just works for me. It just does. And yeah, if you're obsessed with Christoph Empire of the Vampire series, just chat with me in the comments down below. And if you're not, let me know in the comments down below what you read this month, what you became obsessed with, or what what book you particularly loved. If you're new, I would love for you to subscribe and chat with me in the comments down below. Join the small community. I'll see you next time, guys. Take care of yourself. Ciao!